The ghosts in these historical site hauntings certainly caused an uproar, in one case invoking the full force of the law. The haunted telegraph tower. A telegraph tower that once operated in Dale, Georgia, seems the last place to be inhabited by a vitriolic spirit presence. Situated next to a railway line, the dreary, solitary building was all there was of Dale and surrounded only by a vast pine forest. With the nearest human habitation a quarter of a mile away, the tower was used only during the tourist season between January and April. For the rest of the year, the gloomy structure stood empty in a silence broken only by the occasional passing of a train. One day early last century, directly in front of the tower, an unknown man was fatally hit by a train. He was to be buried near where he had fallen, in full view of the tower windows. It was after this tragedy that train crews began noticing strange and ominous occurrences which would happen when they passed Dale Tower. The brakemen would hear eerie noises around the switch, and the engine men would find their train carriages mysteriously uncoupled. Then eventuated the January morning when the telegraph workers arrived at the tower to commence the tourist season. They discovered a long dead body inside the tower. They assumed that he was a tramp who had sought shelter there only to meet a very lonely end in the isolated building. The unfortunate man was, like the first casualty, fated to remain unidentified and also laid to rest beside the tower. It was little wonder that it soon reached the point where the railwaymen dreaded having to pass the location, and very few summoned the courage to actually enter the tower. On January 4, 1911, 3 telegraph workers by the names of Bright, Davis and Clark arrived at Dale Tower to commence their season's activities. For the following 3 months, the tower would be not only their workplace but their residence. The tower actually contained 2 small rooms, one above the other, with a trapdoor closing the stairs leading to the upper room. It is unknown if the 3 young men were aware of the tower's eerie reputation, but if not, they were soon to find out the hard way. The first strange thing they noticed was that it was impossible to keep the trapdoor closed, no matter how tightly they secured it. The instant their backs were turned, it would fly open. The men finally nailed the door shut with the same result. Then an iron bar was placed across it, which was again ineffective. Soon after this, the men started hearing the sounds of footsteps on the stairs, and more tangible manifestations became apparent. In front of their very eyes, window sashes would be slowly raised, then lowered by invisible hands. Various objects like cans, lanterns and pans would float through the air unassisted, with one lantern rushing across the room and smashing itself into the wall. A can opener flew around with such ferocity that it fastened itself on the ceiling. On one particular day, objects such as bolts and taps were hurling themselves around inside the tower with such frenzy that the men became frightened for their safety and raced outside. As if in response, a chair was tossed out of the upper window, narrowly missing Davis. Understandably, the men began to feel that their job was becoming dangerous and terrifying, to the point of being undoable. On 2 occasions, Bright walked the 7 miles to Savannah with the intention of quitting, but both times realised that he was unable to sensibly explain that he was being chased out of his job by a ghost. Both times he returned to the tower. The 3 workers, desperate for the terrifying phenomena to just leave them in peace, decided that perhaps their deck of playing cards was the source of all the trouble. They threw it out the window. Immediately after this action, the cards returned and were found in a bag of rice, while the case which had held them turned up in a tightly closed canister of coffee. The cards in their case were then thrown under a passing fast train by the men, but unnervingly found in a bed a moment later. A paranormal researcher of the day called Thomas Hart Raines interviewed all the men and described this case in the May 1911 Occult Review. He inspected the site and attested to the men's intelligence and honesty, with the impossibility of explaining the phenomena by any local conditions. He related that finally the men resorted to burning a large quantity of sulphur inside the tower, perhaps based on the hypothesis that Satan himself was after them. Strangely, that may have placated whatever grim spirit was haunting the tower. The men reported to Raines that after this small ritual, the sinister phenomena troubled them no more. Ackley's Nyack House. This haunting account is enshrined in legal history. From the time Helen Ackley first moved into her 18-room Nyack, New York house, she knew it was inhabited by ghosts. Within the dream home, which overlooked the Hudson River, light fixtures would inexplicably sway back and forth while spectral footsteps could be heard throughout the estate. The strangely generous poltergeists would sometimes even leave Victorian curios for the Ackley family, such as a silver ring and sugar tongs. Every morning, the spirits would act as alarm clocks, shaking the beds of Ackley's children when it was time for them to get up. On one occasion, her daughter Cynthia loudly informed the ghosts that as she was on spring break, she did not need to get up early. The bed shaking then stopped. In 1982, Ackley declared that after 15 years in the house, she wasn't afraid. Despite the hauntings being ongoing, she said that the presences were very friendly and that she had no desire to get rid of them. Given that they had probably been in the house a lot longer than she had come to think of them almost as family or very good friends who were comforting to have around when she was home alone. She believed that the ghosts were those of a young Revolutionary-era naval lieutenant, a young woman, and an older man who wore colonial-era clothing. Ackley even took a certain pride in inhabiting a haunted house. In May 1977, writing a Reader's Digest article about her ethereal friends. Notwithstanding this long and peaceful cohabitation, the ectoplasm hit the fan in August 1989 when the family put the house up for sale. One buyer, called Jeffrey Stambovsky, was quick to make a down payment of $32,500 for the $650,000 house. It was soon after that Stambovsky found out he was also purchasing a trio of ghosts. He did not share Ackley's affection for departed spirits and was definitely averse to the idea of being haunted. The disgruntled buyer declared himself a victim of ectoplasmic fraud and filed suit requesting that his contract to purchase the house be cancelled. He also sued Ackley and her realtor for fraudulent representation, with one of his lawyers pointing out that others might not experience Ackley's harmonious relations with the ghosts. Perhaps they might not like her moving and express their discontent. In March 1990, State Supreme Court Justice Edward Lehner supported the defendants and ruled that Ackley was not legally obliged to inform Stambovsky that the house was haunted. Lehner stated that Stambovsky, by trying to get out of his contract, was at fault and not entitled to receive back his down payment. That the doctrine of caveat emptor, or buyer beware, still applied in real estate transactions. While acknowledging that a house's reputation could affect its market value, Lehner declared that Ackley was not required to disclose her beliefs regarding supernatural inhabitants, nor to reveal the articles written about her house. Ackley even told reporters that she would be happy to take the ghosts with her if they wanted to come. When Stambovsky appealed the decision, the Appellate Division of New York Supreme Court agreed with him and in July 1991 ruled that Stambovsky could sue to recover his payment. The court declared that Ackley had deliberately fostered the public belief that her house was possessed and had a duty to inform buyers about the ghosts. The court deliberated that although the doctrine of caveat emptor would normally hold, ghosts were not a feature that any prospective buyer could be expected to be aware of upon normal inspection of the property. They added that Ackley had obviously also not delivered on her promise to leave the premises vacant because the house was haunted. Stambovsky was able to finally get back half his deposit. Ackley later sadly told reporters that her pet ghosts had not followed her to her new home in Florida, despite seeming quite put out when the family left. After her passing in 2003, her son-in-law predicted that her spirit would return to Nyack and her ghost companions. However, the subsequent owners of the house have not reported any supernatural activity. An interesting takeaway is that the state of New York has ruled that ghosts legally exist. Anyone selling a haunted house should make sure that any potential buyers know about it well in advance.